Next, we have Erika Frank from the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving.
Good afternoon, Senator Hartley, Representative Simmons, Senator Martin, Representative Buckby, and distinguished members of the Commerce Committee. My name is Erika Frank, and I'm a Senior Community Impact Officer at the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, the community foundation for the greater Hartford region. I appreciate this opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 5481, an act establishing a grant program for women and minority-owned businesses. As part of our efforts to dismantle structural racism and improve economic mobility for residents, we seek to promote job creation by increasing access to capital and other supports for Black and Latinx small business owners and entrepreneurs. We've seen that the structure of many relief programs has made it more difficult for these very small neighborhood businesses owned by persons of color to have access. These businesses often lack close ties to the mainstream banking system, and many need hands-on technical guidance, translation, or other supports to complete application processes. In May of 2020, the Hartford Foundation partnered with the City of Hartford, Capital for Change, and HEDCO to provide an initial $1.25 million in emergency grant assistance to Hartford businesses with revenues under $500,000. Demand for the program was high, with close to 250 applications received in the first day. 72% of awarded businesses were led by people of color, and 48% were owned by women. We've seen that grant capital, as opposed to debt, levels the playing field for those small businesses that may not qualify for loans due to a lack of credit history, lack of access to equity, and those that are already fully leveraged. A unique aspect of this program was its inclusion of neighborhood-level technical assistance providers. TA providers went so far as to go door to door down the city's major commercial corridors, helping business owners find and scan documents and complete the application questions. We have found that even small amounts of grant capital have made a large impact on sustainability. While the maximum grant size was capped at $10,000, actual grants awarded averaged a little over 7,700. Of the 161 businesses awarded in the first round of funding, approximately 86% were still in operation as of reporting received last November. Grants were used primarily for lease payments and staff wages. The foundation and its partners are preparing for additional rounds of funding to help businesses through the remaining winter months and to reopen safely in the spring. For these reasons, the foundation supports House Bill 5481, which recognizes the need to support the sustainability of small businesses owned by women and people of color that have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19 through greater access to grant capital. Our engagement has made clear that grants are needed not only for small businesses themselves, but for the ecosystem of mentors, coaches, and technical assistance providers that know these businesses best. So thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony, and I'm prepared to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Erika, for your testimony and for patiently staying with us today at this hearing, and so appreciate your support for this bill to support grants for small businesses, in particular women and minority-owned businesses who we know have been disproportionately affected. And thank you for sharing the statistics that you shared and for sharing more information about the grant program you're working on and for all you do at the Hartford Foundation. One question I have is we've been getting a lot of feedback from small business owners, and one of the reasons we wanted to introduce this bill was because we heard feedback that they can't afford to take on more debt right now. While the low interest loan programs are great, what they really need is grants, particularly during this difficult, winter we have when businesses are still at, half capacity and not able to get the full revenue that they would be getting in normal times. And so in terms of the grant, it was really helpful to hear the example you shared, and I'm wondering if you have any feedback for this bill, if you think we should specify a certain amount for this grant, or if you think we should, target certain industries or certain distressed municipalities in terms of targeting this grant to those businesses that are most in need.
Sure, thank you for the question. I will say, I think that some of the very small businesses, we've seen that the federal relief programs define small business very broadly, those with employees 500 and under, And really the small businesses, at least in the neighborhoods in Hartford, often have 25 employees and under, which is why we really targeted our grant program to those businesses with revenue under 500,000. So we're really targeting those small businesses where a small amount of grant capital can make a very big difference. We did find that there are several industries that are harder hit than others. Certainly your brick and mortar businesses, retail and food service, but also childcare, home childcare providers. And we can certainly provide some more data on exactly the industries that we saw the highest demand for. But I think what we definitely saw is that in this emergency period, businesses have already taken out the loans that they may be eligible for. And so if we want them to survive, particularly small businesses owned by women and people of color that already have been affected by structural barriers affecting their access to capital, providing grants, at least during this emergency period, is the most effective way to lead to long-term sustainability. We are hearing from our community development financial institution partners, CDFIs, about plans looking at sort of low interest debt for recovery. But we aren't yet at that period yet. So at this time, we do still see the need for emergency grant support being the highest priority.
Got it. Thank you so much for that helpful answer. And you're so right on the mark that, there were already structural barriers to accessing capital for women and minority-owned businesses even prior to the pandemic. And then just looking at how hard they've been hit during this pandemic makes it all the more critical. And especially, as you said, the childcare industry, when so many of them have had to shut down, and the importance of supporting that industry. So thank you so much for that answer. And with that, I want to open up to any other questions. Representative Stephanie Thomas.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair. I had to stand up. Thank you. Obviously, this is an important topic. I've spoken with so many business owners who first, even with the federal programs, had a lot of barriers to accessing those, especially the first draw of the PPP. One thing I hadn't thought of prior to this pandemic, when talking about grant capital for small and women-owned businesses, minority and women-owned businesses, I hadn't thought about restricting the grants for certain uses, like we saw with PPP, to keep staff on or to pay rent or utilities. And I'm just curious if that is something we should think about with grant relief programs. Do you have any data or any anecdotal thoughts about if that's helpful or harmful?
Sure. So I can share that we did ask the businesses that applied for the program what their greatest need was, and really saw our program as filling the gaps in other relief. I will share, I have the data in front of me that we did ask them at the back end how they spent the money, and about 30% of the dollars were spent on staff wages, another 30% on lease expenses, another 15% on utilities, 10% on vendor payments, and 15% on other expenses. But I do think we will continue to be flexible, because as we look at funding for reopening costs, we would see that might flip to sort of the hard costs or minor capital improvements needed in order to facilitate reopening with social distancing. It might be getting inventory back in stock so that they can reopen effectively. And so we are continuing to be flexible in the administration of our grant program.
Thank you for that data. I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Thomas. Any other questions? Oh, Madam Co-Chair, Senator Hartley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Erika, thanks for being with us. really important subject and proposal. We have heard anecdotally or otherwise that in particularly small business, but women and minority-owned businesses are not necessarily plugged into the application process, the internet, having that as a resource, and therefore were kind of additionally left out. Can you comment about the outreach to this particular cohort? We had, for example, a informational hearing with the Small Business Association, who walked us through their panoply of programs, and then we got some information through that session that there were, this is in urban areas, people who clearly did not get the information, did not connect on this. Is this a real issue? And whatever we're talking about, does that have to be factored in?
Thank you. I think that's a great question, and outreach, I think, is a critical component when you want to look at supporting very small neighborhood businesses owned by people of color and women. And I do think it's something that we tried to do particularly well. And there is really, and I know more so in Hartford, but I'm sure throughout the state, a robust network of technical assistance providers. They may be merchants associations that focus on a specific street or neighborhood. We have several in Hartford. We also have the Chamber of Commerce, and also our CDFI community. So we did, prior to launching our application, have the 8 to 10 small technical assistance providers that know businesses on the ground. We had them see the application ahead of time, answer any questions that they had, and really prepare them. They already had lists of those businesses they knew in their communities and their neighborhoods that could benefit from this program and that were struggling. So we really did all that we could to give a leg up to those that might not hear about these programs otherwise. And as I said in my original testimony, to the point where we had technical assistance providers going up and down major corridors, knocking on doors and asking business owners if they knew about the program and what they needed to get in an application. And a lot of times that included translation services. It included scanning documents for them if there wasn't that access to technology, and helping them interpret questions and provide the responses that we needed. We had a very streamlined application process. It was in Spanish as well as English, but I think the intentionality in that outreach and technical assistance support is critical to really reach neighborhood businesses, particularly those owned by Black and Latinx populations.
So, Erika, thank you for that descriptive answer about the technical assistance. So we were also informed that, so short of a particular community having a listing of their small businesses, which maybe a chamber has, or, that the Secretary of State's office business listing is doesn't quite have that reach and isn't updated. Do you have any comment on that?
I don't. We are a funder, so we're certainly a partner in this work, but we really rely on the CDFIs that we work with, the chamber and the technical assistance providers. So I unfortunately don't have thoughts on that particular question.
Yeah, because I'm wondering how we have a compilation of all of these businesses, other than doing this kind of one-off, if you will, knocking on doors, I mean, short of the Secretary of State, I mean, you have to register your business. And so we're just trying to appreciate the situation and maybe leverage current technology in a better way than we have to date in order to achieve our goal. Because one of the things that has, as long as I've been kind of on this committee, that has come back to us is we have this goal, but we're not meeting it. We're not doing what we should on this particular goal. So we recognize it as a goal, but however we're seeking to achieve it seems to have some gaps. So that's what we're kind of wrestling with, but I appreciate your being with us and sharing your model, which is pretty compelling. Thank you, Erika.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Co-Chair. Any other questions from committee members? Oh, Representative Thomas, yes.
Yes, sorry, thank you. Again, I just want to piggyback on something Senator Hartley just alluded to. It occurs to me that for decades, there have been many women and minority-owned business programs, grants, et cetera. And I've often heard the criticism that they basically benefit white women because they are more likely to be looped in, et cetera, compared to some of these hard to reach minority-owned businesses. And I'd just be curious if you could speak any opinion you have about whether or not these communities can be bundled for that exact, if you're looking for a racial justice lens on this, or should they be bifurcated?
Sure, I think that's a great question, and we've certainly seen that as well, which is why we always ask for data to be disaggregated, not only by gender, but also by race and ethnicity, so you can start to understand who exactly you're reaching. I think because of the specific target of our particular program, which is within the confines of the city of Hartford, which is a majority minority city, we didn't have that as an issue. However, I would certainly recommend if you are considering a program of broader scope, to have specific targets specifically for race and ethnicity. And certainly there's some crossover there. I mean, we were talking about childcare earlier, and that is an industry where it's, especially in our cities, it's predominantly women of color that own those businesses. So yes, I would definitely recommend the committee to have specific targets. We want to encourage entrepreneurship by women. I do think, it is an area that in some instances can be dominated by men, but we do want to make sure that we have specific targets for racial and ethnic minorities. And I just wanted to address the last comments too by Senator Hartley. I think, the reason why this outreach will probably continue to be difficult for small businesses, particularly in urban areas, is because of the multiple issues that cause lack of access, such as lack of internet access, the digital divide, and then just, different cultural ways that businesses get access to capital. Many immigrant cultures don't necessarily use the banking system or the traditional resources that others do. They turn to their families and others. So in some ways, I think it's good to have those centralized ways to contact all businesses and let them know what's going on. But I do also think with this population, there's always going to have to be that additional outreach person to person that may be required.
Thank you for your expertise. I will just add a footnote to what you just said. I've spoken to a few minority business owners who are struggling during COVID. And I have asked them if they have tapped into or followed some of these grant programs, government programs. And they said, oh, like, we will wait until we are destitute before we reach out for help, because they are very much invested in, like, this is our business. We will sell our car before we ask for help, which I think is a very interesting approach that we have to be aware of in whatever we shape. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative